All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Sean Schrader. I'm very fortunate to serve as the president of the National Association of Graduate and Professional Students. And we work to serve as the voice of graduate students around the country, regardless of where they are at currently in their academic journey in higher education. And as a part of our series and focus on really thinking about the fall semester and how we are working to engage our student leaders like you as the fall semester quickly approaches, we're very excited to hear from different thought leaders and folks who are making an incredible impact in the higher education space, who can not only provide support and insight into how you all can continue the work you're doing on your own college campuses, but also how you can, from a personal level, think about how to get the most out of your college experience. And so I'm very, very honored and excited tonight to have with us Dr. Matthew Koschmann, who is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Colorado Boulder. His research focuses on organizational communication and collaboration with an emphasis on the civil society sector and nonprofit organizations. He teaches classes on organizational communication, leadership, collaboration, persuasion, group interaction, qualitative research methods, and organizational theory and philosophy. And I'm very excited to have him join us now tonight. And I got to tell you, Matt, you have really one up me on the background game. Thanks for joining us.
Well, at a wonderful place like the University of Colorado here in Boulder, it's pretty easy to come up with some nice background. Just look out the window, take a picture of anything, and you're in good shape. But honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, hey, it's better, I think, than the Florida weather. You at least get to break out the jacket probably a little more often than me. Well, thank you very much for taking some time and joining us. I guess first of all, have a very cool background. In addition to what I've mentioned, did some research. You've been a Fulbright scholar, which is really cool. You've done some work in the media space, from the standpoint of films and things like that. Could you kind of walk us through your path up to this point, and kind of some of your interests and what's kind of guided you?
Absolutely. I was a business major as an undergrad at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And as part of that, I really enjoyed a lot of the communication classes I was taking for my business major, and that led me a bit more to the path of communication. But even that was a little bit of a winding path. Early in my undergraduate time, I took a few classes in economics, and I really enjoyed that. And I met with a professor to talk about what it might look like to be an econ major and pursue a career in economics. He said, it's a great major, it's a great career. You'll likely need to go to graduate school in order to have much of a career in the field of economics. And I said, well, I'm never going to graduate school, so I'll be a business major. Lo and behold, 6 years of graduate school later, here we are. But the point being, you never really know where things are going to take you. And my journey has been a complicated mix of idealism and vision, but a lot of circumstance and coincidence, and just taking what seemed like the next right step at the time, and rarely with a clear sense of where that might take me. So as I got more involved in the communication aspects of my business major, I finished up school, had a number of job offers. This was the late 1990s. Everybody was getting jobs out of college. So, but I took a year off, worked for a nonprofit organization, took a year off from some of the job offers I had to work for a nonprofit organization still in Madison, Wisconsin, and became more interested in ideas and research and scholarship, and decided maybe graduate school would be actually might be a good next step. But again, no ambitions of going on for a PhD. I pursued a master's degree in communication and philosophy at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. That was kind of accidental as well. My folks had moved to Albuquerque when I was in college. I didn't grow up there, but had a connection. Seemed like a good next step. But as I got more involved in research and teaching during that first year, then I decided that I think this is the career path for me. And so when I eventually, a few years later, pursued a PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, that was very much a career move. I went there with the intention of getting a PhD as in many ways, the price of admission for an academic career and a position as a faculty member. But even during that time, there were things and ideas that I was exploring that are very different than the work that I do now. Some of the work that I do now and is central to my scholarly identity are things that I was critical of or ignorant of during my PhD program. And so a lot of that has been a pretty winding, circuitous route to where I am today. But as I finished up the PhD program at the University of Texas, there was a job opening here at University of Colorado Boulder. I applied for that position. And like any faculty position, it was quite competitive. I had no idea how that was going to turn out, but it ended up being a fit. I've been here since 2008. To this day, I still pinch myself walking across campus, and I'm waiting for that letter to show up in my mailbox saying that there's been a little bit of an accident. You know, we made a mistake. You weren't the right person. I mean, I still feel some of that imposter syndrome that I think is pretty common to all academics. And so a lot of it has just been embracing some of those tensions, some of those anxieties, and realizing those are inherent parts of the job, of the career path, of the nature of scholarship in the academy. And it's more about embracing some of those things, navigating, mitigating some of those things, rather than letting them bog you down and drive you crazy. Because there's a lot going on here in the world of academics, but it's a beautiful career, it's a beautiful profession. There's a lot of amazing things happening. I couldn't imagine doing anything differently. And I guess maybe to wrap up this first part, I think that's pretty indicative of a lot of people in academics. Academically, I've heard so many people say some version of this is not at all what I imagined myself doing, and now I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And that's very much true for my circumstances.
Well, that's really amazing and really so insightful to kind of hear your path, and one for the most part that was not plotted out, that was really kind of based off of circumstances and what was available in the moment. And I think that is a great segue into my first question. Thinking about, on the individual student level, as you know, as you just mentioned, we've got some incredible challenges right now, that are taking place. I think a lot of uncertainty, not just for, academics, but throughout the world with our challenges and really understanding what the future looks like. And I think for a lot of students, at least that I speak with, something that has become more and more pressing is mental health challenges. I think that a lot of folks are so accustomed and used to these types of virtual interactions or staying on this thing, which is great and great breakthroughs, which can allow for these things instead of me having to take a plane out to Colorado. I think that can be good, but at the same time, it can be challenging then for students to break out of those barriers. Then, when it comes to things like networking and in-person functions, I think to really leverage opportunities. Do you have any advice or insight for how students can do this, especially given, the environments they find themselves in? I think a lot of times where if you work from home virtually all the time, you take classes virtually all the time, there's not a lot of incentive or opportunities unless you really go out of your way, I think, to do more in-person things.
Absolutely. Certainly a key part of being successful in the academy in this profession is developing personal networks, not just in terms of professional affiliations and getting good advice or feedback or ideas, but also social support, general camaraderie, and everything that's related to connecting with other people. And so at some level, this is nothing short of leaving the house and making human connections. That, of course, is going to be easier for some people than others. And we all have different circumstances that give us different affordances or limitations on how we can do that. And so how that happens is going to be different for everyone else. But really, that is the floor. There is nothing, it's never going to be anything less than that. And so prioritizing ways to make human connections is super important. Now, there's a number of things to keep in mind, especially as you connect that, as you did so wisely, to issues of mental health. We hear a lot about the term resilience these days, which is a very important characteristic for us to practice, to develop, whatever the case may be. I think an important distinction can be made, and this is actually something, it's not central to my research agenda, but it's a very big concept in my field of communication and aspects of organizational studies. Often resilience is conceptualized as a psychological or a cognitive concept, and there's a lot of value in doing that. But the upshot is seeing it as like a personality trait. It's either something you've got or you don't. I'm a resilient person or I'm not a very resilient person. And communication scholars in general are going to see it a little bit differently. Rather than a psychological or cognitive construct, we're going to see it more as a social practice or process, meaning resilience isn't something you have, it's something you do, and it's something you practice. And so rather than thinking of yourself as like, well, I'm just not a very resilient person, it's what are the things that I can do to foster resilience in my life? Whether that's something I have internally or not, is it part of my ongoing ecosystem of academic involvement? So one piece of advice would be to pursue things that foster resilience, especially in ways that are distinct for you. If a big source of anxiety is feedback and critique on the work that you submit to conferences or whatever, finding ways to talk to people about those sorts of things. If it's about the writing process and making progress in your writing, there's lots of great writing groups on most campuses to encourage that kind of work. If it's about your relationship with advisors or other faculty in your department, finding ways to make connections in that regard, especially if those connections might be outside of your department. So I think a big part of it is how you develop, how you practice resilience and develop your capacity for ongoing resiliency rather than just seeing it as a stable or static construct that you either have or don't have. A second thing I'll say here has to do with just the simple practice of showing up. And what I mean by that is every good thing that has happened to me in my career has been some complicated mix of intentionality on my part, but a lot of circumstance and accidental stuff. I consider myself relatively lucky, but I'm also a firm believer in you create your own luck as well. And what I mean by that is, you can't control and predict things that are going to happen, but you have some control over the conditions, over the factors, over the environments that you're putting yourself in that increase the probability of some of those lucky outcomes happening. And so that means even things that might look like they might not be productive for your work, just going to those networking events, going to those colloquia in your department, going to that extra presentation on campus, when you're at academic conferences, going to that panel and introducing yourself to a presenter afterward. I cannot tell you, I mean, we would fill up this whole recording if I shared all these instances I've had of really significant, impactful parts of my career. And I'm talking about publications, funding, a lot of different professional opportunities that just happened because I was there. And I made a connection that led to a connection that led to an invitation, or it sparked an idea that became a significant part of a writing project at a particular time. So those are a couple of things I would say is find ways to practice resilience that are relevant for you and just show up, be present. Things will happen. You can create your own luck.
Well, thank you. And that's very powerful. I've often heard, the luckiness is combined with opportunity and being at the right place in the right time. And your talk about resiliency is very important. I think, a lot of times nowadays students have that mindset, well, what looks good on the resume, what looks good on the job application, which, can be phrased, I think, in a, descriptive sense of being good. But I think general competencies of resiliency, of adaptability, can get you so far, I think, in life. Because as you said, you never know what tomorrow or or what a few hours might bring from now, and how you can adapt, I think, is really critical. And the idea of showing up is one I'd love to get your thoughts on a little bit more. I think that there has been a transition in recent years in students, kind of willingness and interest in serving in different capacities, especially when it comes to, volunteer roles. And I get it. Cost of living is high. There are only so many hours in the day, and people have got to make a living. They've got to get paid in some capacity. However, I've always been a big believer that there's a great power that comes in volunteering. Of course, my position in this role is totally volunteer led. I do have to probably taken more coffee than I used to keep up with all the emails. But you know, in all seriousness, it's one of those I find great value in though because of the connections you build and the skills and things of that nature. However, you know, when you speak with other students, they share that on their own campuses, it can be very hard to engage their peers just because they're not simply interested in that or because they don't see a specific tangible outcome that'll come from their commitment of their time. They're just not, you know, willing to get engaged. And just kind of curious your insights on this. You know, in any ways you kind of see around this from the sense of possibly engaging students who feel like there's no value to getting involved, or you know what those benefits could look like.
Yeah, let me offer an argument in favor of that sort of involvement and being connected to that type of work. And I'll draw on a little academic thinking here, especially as it relates to organizational studies. But one of the conceptual theoretical frameworks that I find very persuasive and influential and have incorporated in a lot of my work is the idea of emergence and complexity theory. And this is something that cuts across both the natural sciences and the social sciences. The basic idea here is that a lot of our society exhibits emergent properties. So a lot of the organizational realities we experience, like organizational culture or workplace satisfaction, these are not individual attributes that can be reduced to any one particular person or even department. They are emergent properties of systems. So systems theory looms large here. Now, the whole point is that emergence comes from the interaction of agents within a particular system. So sticking with the notion of organizational culture, we can describe the culture of an organization as abusive, as supportive, as innovative, any number of things. You can't find that innovation or abuse in any one particular cubicle or one particular building. It's an emergent property of the system, and it comes through the patterns of interactions of agents in the system. Okay, so if you're still with me on the theoretical foundation here, the more practical point is most of the good stuff you're going to experience on campus in an academic career is going to be an emergent property or an emergent phenomena of some kind of system. And that will not happen without interaction among agents in that system. If you are not part of that interactive process, you are not going to experience the benefits of those emergent properties. So let's try to make this a little more practical. Perhaps one of the things that you're hoping to gain through the work that you're doing is some sort of insight or support or encouragement or whatever the case may be. Often that is going to emerge within a particular social system. If you are not connected to that, you are not going to experience that. Now, the tricky part is a lot of emergent properties are unpredictable. They happen at the edge of equilibrium. They're non-linear. They are exponential, meaning that you can have a bunch of minor interactions that seem to lead to nowhere, and then you have that one where you make an exponential leap in the progress, whether that's the quality of a relationship or the professional advice you receive, or whatever the case may be. But the key takeaway is you've got to find a way to be part of the interaction among agents in a system that help facilitate these sorts of emergent system level properties. Now, sometimes this can cut against our conventional wisdom because we want the direct cause and effect reasoning. I do this, I do activity X, I get outcome Y. And that's just not how social systems tend to work most of the time, at least for the important stuff. And so a big part of it is embracing the logic of emergence, of indirect outcomes, of exponential causality, if you will, meaning that small scale interactions can sometimes scale up to large scale outcomes, and that those are often unpredictable, but to participate in those processes. Okay, so I realize that's a bit esoteric and abstract, but what that means is getting out of the business of trying to predict and control the exact cause and effect from any particular behavior, and rather say, instead say, what are the types of contexts that have a higher probability of leading to good outcomes. So if I'm struggling with my writing, for example, joining a writing group, even though I don't know how showing up on a Wednesday afternoon is going to help me finish my literature review, and it might not, but it's the kind of interaction, it's the kind of system agent interaction that is likely to lead to the emergent property of quality writing or improved writing or breakthroughs in my writing. And it might take a couple Wednesday afternoons for that to happen, but there's likely to be an exponential outcome as a result of that involvement. So that's my more theoretical conceptual pitch for why it's important to be connected to these sorts of agent interactions within a system, because that's how those quality system outcomes come to be, through the emergence of that interaction.
Well, thank you very much for that example, I think, which is probably the most powerful example I've ever heard on a conceptual level. I mean, most times it's very base level. Well, you'll get more LinkedIn followers, or maybe you'll get some free food or free shirts or whatever, or pencil, whatever you're looking for out of the deal backpack. But I think what you said is so important. That idea that you go into this thinking, well, I'm only going to this because I need a job, or I'm only going to this because I need to talk to this particular person. Maybe those things come out of it, but I think when you have that open-ended mindset of saying, well, I'm hopeful of this goal, but if something else happens along the way, you kind of can go with that as well. I think is a good recipe, to be really, really successful. I guess, thinking about these concepts and in this idea of engaging students, one thing I think that is very interesting in the higher education space right now, is the rise of artificial intelligence and other things, how that will impact, I think, some of the professions moving forward. And especially, now that you have disagreements, I think, about the role of higher education, right? Some people say, well, higher ed to get a master's, a JD, a PhD, that's all great, because we need those leaders. And then other people say you shouldn't do any of that stuff. You should just go for a, sole focus on some kind of technical trade certificate, and do nothing else. And I'm a firm believer. I think both can coexist, right? We need thought leaders just as much as we need a plumber or a mechanic. But have you found that kind of sentiment in the work you've done? And how do you work to bridge that kind of divide, in trying to, provide consensus for maybe those differing viewpoints on the value of both focus areas?
Yeah, great question. Certainly the role of artificial intelligence, broadly defined and very broadly applied, is one of the most significant questions and issues confronting not just higher education, but really every sector of our society and economy. And I don't even think we don't even know, I don't know that we're even asking the right questions. I think where we're going to be 5 years from now, we probably couldn't have even predicted. And that's just the nature of these sorts of systems and the exponential growth and the way social systems have feedback loops and inform each other. So this is some pretty significant uncharted territory. And it's understandable that it could be certainly a source of anxiety, a source of uncertainty. I think there is a general theme for all technological developments, or at least the ones that have had significant impact on our society. I mean, I don't want to be so demure as just saying resistance is futile, but I mean, I think there is some aspect of this that says those who are successful are those who find ways to incorporate this technology into the work that they're doing, rather than stick their head in the sand and just resist. So count me on this, even though I'm not a computer science major. I don't do coding and programming, but I keep up as best I can through podcasts and the headlines and whatever else on how artificial intelligence is influencing higher education and college classroom and research and publication and things like that. I would say there's a number of things going on that stand out to me in the little that I've been learning. One, it's pretty clear that artificial intelligence is simultaneously amazingly brilliant and embarrassingly stupid. And there are I mean, the stories of what artificial intelligence has accomplished, things that took humanity a long time to accomplish, whether it's sequencing various things in genetics and DNA and whatever the case may be, to doing very complex computations. But then you hear all these anecdotes of the kinds of hallucinations and mistakes that artificial intelligence is making. And it shows that there's still some intrinsic aspect of humanity that is never going to be fully captured by artificial intelligence. And to the extent that we as humans can find ways to continue to contribute to that is going to be valuable. Now, what does that maybe look like in the classroom, for example? So I've tried my best to embrace and incorporate things like ChatGPT in my classroom. And I've talked with undergraduate students, we'll have an exam online, and it'll include a short answer question. And we'll talk about incorporating ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. I've done this with graduate students and looking at comprehensive exam answers or take-home finals. And we've looked at some examples where the artificial intelligence will generate a beautiful sounding answer with a few key fatal flaws. And if you don't know, even if you can program something, but as you're reading through what is generated, if you can't recognize what is wrong or what needs to be corrected, I mean, that really shows a deficiency in learning. Conversely, if you can edit, critique, correct a generative AI output, that to me shows a real level of understanding. I don't think the essential skill here is typing. I'm not really that concerned whether answers are typed or not. If it's generated by a computer, great. It's being able to decipher what mistakes might be made, what shortcomings are missing, how certain things are connected. It's kind of like leaving DNA at a crime scene. You may have what seems like an airtight alibi, great reasoning for why you're innocent of a crime. But if it turns out that your DNA is at the crime scene, I mean, game over. It doesn't matter. Same thing with some of these generative AI responses. They sound beautiful, but they can miss one little thing that shows like, oh my gosh, they don't understand anything. It's that understanding is the essential skill that the human brings. So in some ways, I think a big part of how we think about artificial intelligence, particularly in higher education, is the way in which we as graduate students, as academics, as faculty, can complement the labor that generative AI is doing with the insight and understanding that in still many ways is uniquely human. I have found AI to be best at assisting me in my work in summarizing my notes, helping me come up with some initial ideas, but it's not so good at the initial creativity, at connecting some of the dots between ideas that I still think requires human ingenuity. It can help us with some of the heavy lifting of the grunt work and the labor, but I think finding ways to elevate, foreground, and maximize the human ingenuity, especially as it relates to understanding, is probably the most significant contribution that those of us in higher education can continue to make.
Well, and thank you for that. I think that is very, very valuable in how you approach it. I think, as you know, and you mentioned, AI is not going anywhere. It's not going to be something that is going to, fall off the map. I think, if anything, it's going to continue to be more and more advanced as time goes on. It was interesting. I was fortunate to do a research tour on AI last summer and found that a lot of employers talked about how AI will not necessarily lead to mass layoffs, but rather repositioning of roles and the work they do to promote further and further work and efficiency. So I think your thoughts on that are very interesting and exciting to see how it'll kind of keep going moving forward.
Yeah, and if I can add, I mean, it wasn't
Oh,
that long ago. I mean, I still remember when, using Google was considered cheating, because
right.
you're just looking up the answer. And of course, generations before, the idea of using a calculator instead of a slide rule, it was like, well, but you don't understand what's going on with the calculation. And what we're seeing is that what it means to quote unquote understand shifts. And we realize that it's okay to not know certain things. Uh, think about the evolution of the automobile. I mean, when I was still, in high school, I was changing my own oil. As my dad said, that's what a real car owner would do. And it was important to understand how things work. And his father before him, thought it was important to understand the internal mechanisms of the combustion engine. And those weren't wrong, but it's relative to a particular innovative era and what can be taken for granted versus what needs to be understood. And for better for worse, uh, there are things about the automobile that I just don't really need to know how they work anymore. We've gotten to economies of scale in terms of how things are installed and repaired and troubleshot that the average car owner doesn't need to know how to do that. But you do need to know how to do other things. You do need to know how to troubleshoot certain things and to manage certain things. And that's important. Same thing with mathematical calculations or searching up things through Google or on a search engine. And I think that's just going to be how artificial intelligence works. There's going to be probably a generational shift of an adjustment of, well, yeah, but you don't really know how AI got that answer. And that may become less and less important.
Yes.
What will become more important is to be able to evaluate that answer and know whether or not it is valid, insightful, if it makes a unique contribution. I mean, I've done plenty of AI output stuff that it's brilliant, but it's missing like 3 key citations that are central to that body of literature. And it's like, if you don't include those citations, you don't know what you're talking about. So I think there's something kind of exciting, even if you're not on the technology side of things, but just to constantly think about, okay, what is my relationship with this technology? How can I enter into some communities of practice where we're talking about these things and I'm in conversation with other people who are either using it in their classroom or using it in their research that might be similar to the kind of work that I'm doing? That's where I have found some really exciting things happening. And it just makes the whole thing a little less scary. And I think we build a little more confidence that, maybe my job isn't at stake here. And actually, I have added value to my position by developing a more sophisticated understanding of complementing this technology with my human ingenuity.
Yes, well, I think that's great. And it shows, again, there's a lot of value to that outside of the box thinking and what it really possesses in order to move the needle in a positive way. And I think that really segues perfectly. I promise to our audience we didn't we didn't coordinate ahead of time on the questions or anything, but into our real last topic I'd love to get your thoughts on. And it's the huge elephant in the room. We've got an election coming up in November. We've got a lot of, I think, challenges in having civil discourse. I've been fortunate to do a little work in this area with an organization called Unify America, helping to lead one of their inaugural youth advisory boards around the country. But I think what's interesting is you've talked about with the rise of AI, the downside is that I think then when you don't have as much critical thinking going on in some cases, when a lot of folks use social media as their number one tool to get news, and I'm guilty of it. Where if you're in a hurry, you just look on X or Facebook or the Apple News headlines, whatever you watch to kind of get major updates about what's going on. Now when you have AI involved, it's so easy to, push out news that's just, not correct. But again, for a lot of people, if they don't have time to fact check it, that may be what they see. And so all of that to say, I'm very excited to see here that you have an event coming up here that's going to be taking place, in September with the University of Colorado about difficult dialogues in election year polarization and how to be good neighbors. I won't spoil, and I don't want you to give away any secret tips you're going to share at that event, but any insight you've got, especially for students, as we talked about when we teed this off tonight, a lot of challenges in the student space, things happening that are domestic issues, international issues where I think students may disagree. How can they have civil conversations respect another viewpoint, without yelling at somebody else or disrespecting them in the process.
Wow, what a great topic. Very important, very complicated. Don't worry, certainly no problem spoiling. We want people to know, and this is not secret. Any insights we have about this, we want to be known. But yes, this is a wonderful project we have in our community. Our Center for Humanities here at the University of Colorado Boulder has some wonderful community partnerships and has been hosting a variety of these what we call difficult dialogues on a number of different hot button issues and topics that just continue to dominate the headlines. And this is just the next one that's coming up, and I was honored to be invited to be a part of this panel. I'm connected with a number of the groups that have been involved here, and so we'll be talking about what it means to have these sorts of conversations. And we've got some great panelists who will be contributing a variety of different perspectives. What I'm going to try to do is talk about things from a communication perspective. And one of the things I'm going to be encouraging people to do is think a little differently about the notion of communication and how our theories of communication are going to underwrite how we choose to engage with people around this and any other issue. What I mean by that, when I say theory of communication, most people don't think about communication in a very theoretical way. Communication is just, it's everywhere. It's just what we do. Most people haven't thought about theorizing communication. They've been communicating their whole life. If you're on this call, you've probably been pretty successful about, or if you're watching this video, you've probably done okay communicating to get to this point. But, we all have a theory of communication. It's just the background assumption of what it is we think we are doing when we interact with other people. Whether or not we are conscious of that, or it's more of a background operating system. And in that regard, there are, to simplify here, two main ways to think about communication. One is what we might call the factory installed off-the-shelf version. And that's communication as transmission, a transmission model of communication. Meaning what we do when we communicate is we transmit information. I get the nouns and verbs that are in my head over to you in your head, and my language represents pre-existing meanings in reality. It's a relatively neutral conduit, and that's not wrong. It's just incomplete. That is, of course, what is happening, but there's so many assumptions being built into that model of communication. It works well when the people interacting with each other have similar values and beliefs, and it's just a matter of conveying the right facts and nouns and verbs. And so when my wife texts me to say, I need you to pick up one of our kids at this time in this place, it's not just that I know what those words refer to. I also already know what our relationship entails, what my responsibilities may or may not be, how that does or does not impact the person on the other end of the communication channel. Like, we don't have to go through all of that. That, of course, is not the case for a lot of our interactions. And so a more sophisticated upgrade from the factory installed off-the-shelf version of communication is the idea of communication as social construction, meaning that our communication doesn't just reflect or represent our realities, it actually constructs many of our social realities. And much of what we experience are social, not physical, but social realities. They're real, but just immaterial. Now, we don't realize this until we have a little bit of a breakdown. To build off the metaphor, if you think about the operating system that comes off the shelf, it works just fine until what? Until you want to run a program or install an application that doesn't work. And then you realize, I need an upgrade. I need a different operating system. And that happens in our communication a lot as well. Is the transmission model works just fine to convey basic facts and information with people we already have shared values and beliefs and agreements and patterns of life with. But what often happens is we have an interaction that goes beyond that, and we realize, oh, this is my way of interacting here isn't going to work here. In fact, it might make some things worse. I need an upgrade. The practical application of this is often when it comes to having discussions about things we disagree on in the realm of politics, culture, society, whatever the case may be. one of the upgrade moments that many of us have is we realize, wait a minute, my providing more facts and better arguments for why my interactive partner is wrong or misguided, it's not working. It's actually making things worse. And there's a wealth of social psychological research that backs this up that shows that, contrary to conventional wisdom, when people are confronted with counterfactuals, rebuttals, or refutations of positions they hold strongly, they don't say, oh, you're right. I am being inconsistent with the application of my philosophical assumptions. Let me change my idea so that I can alleviate the cognitive dissonance that plagues me and be more in line with the truth of your position. If somebody ever says that to you, please let me know. That would be a fantastic research study because it might be the first of all time for that to happen. Most often, what happens is people dig in and they find more reasons to figure out why you're wrong and why they continue to be right. And so you quickly realize, you know what? Arguments, they're not persuasive. More facts and information, they're not persuasive. Now, if your goal is to win an argument and have somebody in a court of law say you win the debate, that's fine. That tends to not change people's minds. And the fact is, people are not required to believe things that are true.
Mhm.
You can give the most airtight, persuasive argument, and someone can still say, no, I don't like that. So what I'm getting at is it invites us to think differently about what it is we think we are doing when we are interacting with other people. I'm not just transmitting facts and nouns and verbs and information. I'm engaged in a complicated process of negotiating a shared understanding of our social realities together. It's much more about meaning, interpretation, and understanding than it is about the objective right or wrong or truth of a particular situation. If that's my mindset, if that's the operating system that I'm running, I'm more likely to inquire rather than to proclaim. I'm more likely to ask questions and to seek understanding of other people's experiences. I'm probably less likely to just jump in and say, yeah, but this is what I think, or, well, that's interesting, but let me tell you about blah, 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 blah. I don't know how to convince this person or change that person's belief. I do know how to shift our thinking so that we have more constructive engagements that increase the probability of more mutual understanding. That entails changing stuff with us, not changing other people. We just can't change other people. We can change ourselves. And there are some important principles of persuasion that do facilitate the probability of more favorable outcomes. Things like reciprocity, things like liking. What I mean by that is people are rarely persuaded by things they don't like. It's rarely the case that someone says, you know what? I think you're a total jerk, but technically you're right, so I've got to agree. What is more likely to happen is people say, I don't see it that way, but I find you so compelling. I want to hear more. Reciprocity is a big thing. People tend to reach more levels of mutual understanding when there's a give and take. So what are we giving versus what are we asking from other people? And a lot of things like that. Obviously, you can tell I could probably go on for quite some time in this regard, but I hope you're seeing the overall takeaway is to be a little more reflexive and self-critical about what is the working assumption of communication that's driving and justifying a lot of my behavior. And might I need to upgrade to a little more sophisticated operating system of communication and social construction, thinking more critically about what are we making together versus what am I objectively transmitting to you in this particular situation.
Yes, well, thank you. And that's very powerful, I think, especially getting past that my way or the highway concept, which really drowns us out so much of the time. Matt, I've really enjoyed your insights, getting to hear your take on some really critical issues, I think, impacting graduate students and how they can be thinking about how to approach some of these challenges as the fall semester approaches. Would it be possible, if you wouldn't mind, any place that students maybe could find out more about your work if they'd like to stay in touch with you or get connected?
Absolutely. I'm pretty easy to find on Google. If you just Google Matthew Koschmann, you'll see a couple of things come up. First of all, my profile page here at the University of Colorado Boulder. Also my personal website that has links to the research work that I do and articles that I've published and book projects I'm involved with and things like that. Another thing that should come up pretty high on the list, I have a YouTube channel called Comprof Productions, where I've been involved in some animated video projects that help explain various aspects of communication and organizational communication and some of the projects I've been involved with. So that's a key thing as well. And then, of course, I welcome any email inquiries if people want to correspond about anything. I love to hear from people who are wrestling with some of these same issues. And if I can be of any help in one's journey and provide some insight that might help along the way, I'd be happy to do that as well. So I certainly welcome email inquiries as well.
Well, Matt, again, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights, your time, the work you're doing. Again, as we talked about at the top, we've got a lot of challenges, but I believe it is small steps with time that really make huge impacts. And clearly, you're doing just that in order to make our world a better place and our communities much better. So, thank you very much for everything you're doing. It's really a pleasure to talk with you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.